Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Wednesday, January 13th, 2016, hump day, middle of the week day, starting that long, slow glide down to Kaahumanu Friday, and hopefully a relaxing weekend. A lot of stuff going on today. Phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Looks like all the buttons are in the right positions here. Quick little program note, Monday, Ken O'Keefe will be our on-air guest talking about his latest project and other current events, so we'll be looking forward to that. Now, obviously, last night was President Obama's final State of the Union speech, which consisted, as expected, of lies, evasions, and threats. It's basically what it came on down to. And he came out with some pretty ridiculous things, including, critics of the economy are peddling fiction, which I think today's stock market kind of signaled a vote of no confidence, at least on that. Obama's basically out there saying, look, things are really good, and, if you don't realize it, you're just too dumb. If you don't believe the government when it says everything's wonderful, but everybody's already all over the net just tearing apart every claim that he made. Was talking about 14 million new jobs created, but those were all in the private sector, not the government. Obama claimed an increase in 900,000 manufacturing jobs over the past 6 years. It's actually declined by 230,000. And the unemployment numbers, everybody knows it's a joke. Because we have 94 million Americans in this country willing and able to work, legal American citizens, and have not been able to find jobs for years. But the government just doesn't count them anymore because that's an embarrassing number going into an election season. Obama responded to accusations that he's soft on terror by invoking how he got Osama bin Laden at Abbottabad, which we all know is just another lie. The real Osama bin Laden died of natural causes, peacefully apparently, in December of 2001. But the propagandists aren't going to let a little thing like dying stop a really useful booga-booga. So we've had all these phony bin Ladens since then, culminating with the one who was killed in Abbottabad, which is why they dumped his body in the ocean before anybody got a good look at him. And apparently, Barack Obama still honestly believes that you are all believing the lies. He doesn't realize the crisis of confidence that is currently out here among the population towards the government as a whole, Congress, the presidency, and corporate media. He actually, apparently, from last night's speech, still thinks you believe everything he's been saying. And he said a lot of really dumb things in the speech here. And I'm not going to go over the list. It's all over. Everybody just ripped this one apart. But if you look back over Obama's presidency at all the promises he's been making that never came about, was promising a cure for cancer. Did that in 2009, 2010, 2015. Freezing government spending for 3 years. He promised that in 2010 and 2011. Actually, he promised 5 years in 2011. We were going to colonize outer space. Well, the Russians are doing a good job of that. And he's been promising he's going to close Gitmo pretty much every year since he took office. Was going to end the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Make health care affordable for all Americans. Pass a law that would prevent mass shootings. And on and on. So the president's lying. We all know it. We know the government lies to control us and rule us. It's time for us to accept that reality and decide what we, the American people, are going to do about it. A government that lies to us. Because I have read that Constitution, cover to cover. There's nothing in there that authorizes the government to lie to the people, and the 10th Amendment forbids them from assuming that right and authority. There actually used to be a law making it illegal for the U.S. government to propagandize the American people Congress repealed that. That should have gone to the Supreme Court on constitutional grounds. Because it's not in the Constitution that the government can lie to us. And every time the government lies to us, they delegitimize themselves completely. Now, let's get on over to this little situation that's been brewing up in Iran. Iran handled this brilliantly because, in my opinion, this was a provocation. These Marines were sent in these two small boats deep into Iranian territorial waters. The official story is they lost communications with these boats, and there was some kind of a mechanical failure which resulted in both of these boats powering into Iranian territorial waters. Now, we all know that the U.S. military has an immense satellite communication network. That's what they use to allow people sitting in a control room in Nevada to be using drones to drop white-hot flaming death on children in the Middle East. So the idea that they were out of communication with both of these ships does not pass the smell test. Maybe there might be an electrical failure on one of them that knocks out the radios, but for both of them to be down, I don't think so. Same thing with the navigation. The fact that there were two ships tells us they were there intentionally. Now, Iran didn't take the bait. I think the timing with Obama's State of the Union speech is not a coincidence. I think Obama wanted to hit that podium last night talking about the new Iran crisis. Iran has captured our Marines, these poor Marines. They're being tortured. They're being made to eat Iranian food and drink Iranian beverages. And look at all those fruits and vegetables, that are non-GMO. This is heck on earth. And, Iran didn't bite. They grabbed them. They said, yeah, it's a mistake. We see it as a mistake. America apologized, and Iran released the boat and the crew. Or at least Iran is saying they received an apology from somebody in the U.S. government, because after the boats and the Marines were returned, a spokesman for Secretary of State John Kerry came on out and said, "We did not apologize. We never apologize, no matter how we screw up. We're the United States of America. We don't apologize." Kind of getting a little bit weird. So, Kerry is full of it. No news there. And I think the hope was that Iran would open fire on the boats or capture these Marines, who apparently surrendered willingly, and hang on to them and make a big stink about it, turn it into a new Iranian hostage crisis. And the Iranians didn't take the bait. And by the way, have you seen the pictures of how those Marines were being treated? They're being fed. They're being fed. They're being treated well. Contrast that with how the U.S. treats captives. Up on the box with the wires on the hand, smeared in feces and all that other humiliation stuff. That is not lost on the rest of the world. Now, Iran is claiming that these Marines were in Iranian waters deliberately, and that they were conducting espionage operations. They have retained the GPS tracking systems off these boats, and they're downloading the data to prove that the entry into their waters was intentional. I don't think it was espionage. I think the U.S. was hoping that Iran would overreact, fire on the ships, keep the Marines, create a whole new crisis. Iran didn't bite. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. When we come on back, more about the Iranian non-crisis. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about the incident in Iran, possibly being an attempt to provoke a confrontation that would have given Obama headlines for his speech last night and would allow the U.S. to evade its obligation to lift sanctions on Iran, which it is now obligated to do because Iran has completed the shutdown of that heavy water reactor. They've removed the core. Iran has kept all of its promises. Now it's time for the U.S. to deliver. And, of course, the U.S. government is under extraordinary pressure from Israel to find some way to wreck this. Now, over the commercial break on Fox News, they were running all these drooling, ravening politicians under the banner headline, GOP candidates rip Obama over the incident in Iran. Marco Rubio was out there saying that Iran's capture of the 10 American sailors was a provocation, clearly. Said they're up to something, I'm sure of that. Now, Marco Rubio, who, like Ted Cruz, does not actually meet the constitutional eligibility requirement to be president. Hang on a second. I have to apologize. Claire and I have been dealing with this terrible head cold that's just lingering on. Anyway, Rubio seems to have forgotten it was the United States that provoked yesterday's incident by sailing 2 patrol boats deep into Iranian territorial waters. Okay? And Rubio and all these other GOP candidates are out there saying, you know, Obama should have taken a sterner line. We should commandeer the entire Strait of Hormuz. How dare the Iranians have their waters so close to the United States Navy? Really, that's a provocation right there. Now, we are hearing from the Iranian media that following the seizure of the 2 patrol boats with the 10 Marines on board, other U.S. naval warships came right up to the line, demarking Iran's territorial waters, and started making threatening and aggressive moves. They did it for about 40 minutes, trying to get the Iranians to fire off something. You know, I dare you to step over that line. I double dog dare you to shoot at us. Go on, you have to shoot at us. They were trying to start a confrontation, and Iran was too smart for them. Iran, by their nature, they're not really a warlike people. It's been over 200 years since they launched a war of conquest against any other nation. And the big problem here right now is Iran has kept all of the promises they agreed to under this P5+1 nuclear deal, and now it's time for the United States to deliver by dropping the sanctions. And the U.S. was trying to find something that would happen where they could keep the sanctions in place. So they sail these Marines into territorial waters, hoping they're going to be captured. Oh, it's a new hostage crisis. Or even better, being fired on. And Iran didn't bite. Iran came on out, defended the territorial waters, said, yeah, we think this was an accident. It's an innocent mistake. Fed the guys, sent them home. But that's what's really going on. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Tom in Maryland, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mr. Rivero, I wonder sometimes if certain folks like yourself, me, and others are looking at things with a filter that other people just don't have. Maybe they have the filter.
Yeah, they have the filter. We're the ones who have taken off our rose-colored glasses or our emerald glasses, depending upon which paradigm or which metaphor you wish to use here. You know, we've taken the red pill, and we see the world as it really is.
I get so angry when I think about the many human rights violations that this country has committed and that we as Americans are looked at as having perpetrated. It doesn't matter that we weren't the military personnel in that jail over in Iraq. We're looked at as a whole as the bad guys. It taints all of us in a very bad way. I spent decades in law enforcement. I'm retired now. I worked with other countries' law enforcement overseas, had the opportunity to meet folks that a lot of people wouldn't have the opportunity to meet, like soldiers from Iraq before we invaded that country. And they're just as normal as you and I, sir. Mm-hmm. And when you juxtapose the way the news media paints an incident like what just happened, it just goes to show that nothing was learned from anything that was done in the past, and nothing was done to correct it. You hear words like, what a disgusting, shameful event, that our people were humiliated, that their pictures were released. It was a crime by the Geneva Convention, says Judge Napolitano. It was shameful and a crime. Now, did they forget about the prison photos from Iraq? Mm-hmm. It still burns me up because not only doesn't taint us as a people, like I said, but it will affect my children and my grandchildren. If ever a conflict occurs where they're taken into custody, we should all be upset, disgusted, and looking for some type of permanent resolution to this kind of lying and nonsense that our government is perpetrating and that we'll ultimately pay the price for.
Okay, well, on a point of technicality, the photos that leaked out from Abu Ghraib were leaked out. They weren't officially released by the government.
I know.
But technically, Iran's releasing of photos and videos of the captured Marines is a technical violation of the Geneva Conventions, except that a state of war does not actually yet exist. The reason they don't, the reason they want those pictures kept out of the media is it does show the contrast between how the U.S. was treating the prisoners in Abu Ghraib and how the Iranians treated these Marines. They treated these Marines just great. You know,
and I would have violated the Geneva Convention myself to show this is how we treat people, and look at how they treated people when they had them in custody. I think it was a good tactical move on their part.
It absolutely was here.
Reversed, I think we should have done it as well. If the situation was reversed. Unfortunately, we're the bad guys here.
Yeah, we are. You know, I mean, all this bluff and bluster about we have to take a hard line with Iran doesn't cover up the fact that the U.S. violated Iran's territorial waters. And now they're saying, well, they should be our territorial waters anyway. We need to move on in and take the Strait of Hormuz. It's strategically important. They're trying to turn this into the U.S. is good, Iran is bad. Nobody's buying it. This was a clear provocation by the United States trying to, get the U.S. off the hook of lifting sanctions, which they are obligated to by treaty.
And the Coast Guard had captured a bunch of Middle Eastern folks heavily armed in our waters. They probably would not have made it back to shore.
I'm not sure I understand exactly what you said, but you're absolutely right. If some Russians were caught entering U.S. territorial waters, it would be a big stink here. And anyway, we got to take a break for commercials. Tom, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And one other thing that Obama said in his State of the Union speech last night was he called for Congress to authorize the use of military force against the Islamic State. Now, obviously, with the U.S. bombing Syria and Iraq and everywhere else, under the excuse that they're fighting the Islamic State, the authorization is meaningless. It is a piece of propaganda to try and convince you, the American people, that the U.S. government has a right to go into other countries where it is not wanted and drop bombs on the excuse that they are fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which we know or have confirmed from the emails coming out of the Benghazi investigation that the U.S. created, supported, and funded ISIS and Al-Qaeda as proxies in the Middle East. Obama still thinks you believe the official story. He is clearly out of touch with the reality of what's going on out here. Now, let's get on over to that bombing in Istanbul. It killed 10 tourists, 9 of them Germans. Now, the police in Istanbul said they identified the suicide bomber as being from Saudi Arabia. Erdogan came out and said, no, it had to be an attack from Syria. Turkey has now arrested 3 Russians who are supposedly linked to this suicide bombing, also linked to ISIS. So now Erdogan has an excuse to fling rockets in both directions, at Syria and Russia. Now, up in Europe, very disturbing article about how German and Polish relations are in a free fall. So they better keep an eye on that radio station over there in Gleiwitz, Germany. And what it all comes down to is Poland still thinks that even though it's a member of the European Union, that it has a certain degree of self-determination and autonomy. And no, that isn't. European values means you take your orders from Brussels. And that's what Germany is trying to enforce across the European Union. Ein Union, ein Führer, ein Volk. Seems like we're traveling back in time. Up in Sweden, their foreign minister is calling for an inquiry into Israeli violence against the Palestinians, describing it as extrajudicial killings. And he's right. Now, here in the United States, the United Methodist Church has decided that they will no longer have their investments going into 5 Israeli banks. And these are the investments they have for their pension plans and various other charitable works. And, of course, Israel's in an uproar. Oh, you're anti-Semites, you're Jew haters. We will force you to give us your money because the Talmud says we're supposed to have all the money anyway. And I love the way Israel keeps insisting that the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is having absolutely no effect. And then every time somebody signs on to it, boy, they just go ballistic. He thinks Israel doth protest way too much. Up in Ukraine, Kiev forces are firing mortar shells at the Donetsk airport. Again, Poroshenko is clearly not interested in abiding by the ceasefire or the Minsk agreements. Meanwhile, over in the Philippines, their high court has now given permission to approve a deal that will allow the return of U.S. troops and weapons to military bases inside the Philippines. Another stick to poke China in the eye with. So, let's talk about the economy. As you know, we had a bad day on the American stock markets. It came as a surprise. I thought we were going to have a good day because last night the Asian markets, the Nikkei and the Hang Seng, were well into the green. And the futures going into the market this morning had the Dow up by 150. Didn't work. May have a reason for that a little bit later. But it was down. At one point, it almost hit 400 down. And it's dangerously close to tipping into the 15,000s. So, we have been talking about the Baltic Dry Index. It hit another all-time low today of 394. And the CEO of CSX, the rail line, basically explaining that the stock in CSX is plunging because they're not getting any shipping business. He's calling it a freight recession and says we see this kind of thing associated with a general recession. It doesn't happen outside a recession. So the indicators are all there. The party is definitely over. And only last night Obama was telling us how great the economy was. And he thinks you believe him. Because after all, he's the president. And you must believe the president. Actually, there's no obligation whatsoever that you believe anything coming out of a politician or corporate media talking head. You are under no obligation to believe anything they say. And you shouldn't, common sense. Now, over at J.P. Morgan, they have an equity strategist, Dubravko Lakos Buhas. He's nicknamed Gandalf because his prognostications are almost magical. And he says, what's going on here is the old conventional wisdom of follow the trend has been thrown out the door. And everybody is now selling the rallies. In other words, everybody knows the plunge protection team is shoving the market up, and every time they see it happen, that's when they're going to sell. Because everybody wants to get out, but they want to maximize their return as they get out. Nobody wants a crash, but we're definitely seeing a controlled decline going on. And every time the market goes up, more people unload. RBS is out there telling its clients, get out of the stock market right now. Invest in gold. Which I did for a while. And then I found out they lose their investment value, those gold coins, if you eat the chocolate bit out of the middle. So don't do that. And best to keep them out of the sun as well. That's something else I learned the hard way. But it's dire out there. People are pulling their money out of the stock market, savings accounts. They're investing in canned foods and shotguns. That's a good solid investment right now. So far, this year, the American stock market has lost $1 trillion with a T in value, and it hasn't even really reached 2 weeks yet. Meanwhile, over at the Treasury, the U.S. Mint quadrupled the allocation of Silver Eagle investment coins, and the sales have gone right through the roof. In fact, the U.S. Mint sold almost as much gold coins on the first day of the year as they did for the entire month of January last year. Now, over in the Congress, Rand Paul's Audit the Fed bill has failed. It was subject to a Democratic filibuster. When they finally got the vote through, it was 53 to 44, but it needed 60 votes to pass. So the Federal Reserve breathes a sigh of relief once again. It will be kept from you, the American people, just how much money they have made off of you with their little Ponzi scheme. By the way, I reprised many of my bankers' articles to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com and to Facebook. And you might want to read them and send them on to other people, in particular the 11th Marble. That really does make it very clear what's been going on. Now, this week, of course, everybody's talking about the Powerball. The Powerball is coming on. The Powerball. And a lot of interest on it because of the huge jackpot. We'll have more about that when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And, of course, that's one of my all-time favorite pieces that the Lady Claire has written. We made a nice video that goes with it. You can find it on YouTube. And I'm hoping at some point in the future, when the war fever has receded from our society, that people may appreciate that song a little bit more than is currently true. Now, we're talking about the economy. We're talking about the Powerball. Everybody's excited. It's a $1.5 billion jackpot. Everybody's out there rushing to buy tickets, even though the odds against winning are just insane. And I would even buy a ticket, but they don't have Powerball here in Hawaii. What most people don't understand is that if you actually win Powerball, the first person or group to show up at your door is the IRS. And they're going to grab 25% of it withholding, and there will be more of it that you have to pay at tax time. And depending upon where you live in the country, that huge Powerball jackpot gets whittled down very quickly by state, local, city taxes. And you owe those taxes even if you don't actually get the money, because up in Illinois, they have a state lottery. But if you win a prize over $600, you don't actually get the money. You get an IOU, where Illinois will pay you what you won in the lottery when things get better, if ever. And strangely enough, you're not allowed to buy the lottery tickets with an IOU. It's kind of a little weird, I think. A lot of people who've won these big lottery prizes, or the Publishers Clearinghouse, have said that it changed their lives in ways that weren't always positive. Because immediately, the flakes and con artists and opportunists just close on in. They want a piece of that action. And sometimes it would cause discord within their family over who gets how much of the prize. So, on the off chance that somebody listening to this show does win that $1.5 billion, we can always use a few more donations here. I'm having to build yet another computer for my wife, because her last one is getting uppity, and it's only 3 years old. So, anyway, getting on back to the economy. JCPenney is closing 7 stores in smaller markets. They just announced that. 7 is not too much when you consider how big they are. Kmart, on the other hand, is closing stores nationwide as their sales continue to dive. Here's the problem. When you have an economic system that is designed to remove all the wealth from the people and put it in the pockets of the bankers, when it succeeds, the economy locks up, which is exactly what's happening now. What little money we have left is going for food, gas, rent. We can't go down to the shopping malls and buy things. So the shopping malls aren't buying products from manufacturers. The manufacturers aren't importing raw materials to make things. Shipping index is down, rail index is down, Baltic Dairy index is down. It's locking up. Because to keep the economy ticking along, there has to be a mechanism by which the money that is collected at the top gets recycled back down to the bottom as decent wages and salaries for American workers, who will then pump that money back into the economy by going to the shopping malls and buying things. That little recycling mechanism, though, got taken out because under fascism, ordinary people are not allowed to have money. Whatever imaginary playmate in the sky the money junkies pray to wants them to have all the wealth. The problem is there aren't enough of them to buy all the products to keep a manufacturing economy going. And that's where we are right now. General Electric is getting ready to cut 6,500 jobs in Europe after the Alstom purchase. Now, there's a story over at Blacklisted News. 93% of American counties have not recovered from the 2008 recession. It's been a continuous recession. This may turn out to be the longest recession/depression in U.S. history. We've already gone on far longer than the depression triggered by the 1929 crash. And everybody is now saying that the decision by the Fed to hike the prime rate 0.25% last month was done for politics, so that Obama could go on the stage at the State of the Union and say, our economy is doing great. You know, and if you don't see it, well, it's obviously your own fault. You're just not looking at things the correct way. Now, getting on to the elections, it's getting interesting. The polls are all over the place who's ahead. And everybody can find at least one poll that says they are winning. But overall, on the Democratic side, the tide is shifting against Hillary Clinton. In Iowa especially, Sanders is pulling a hefty lead in the polls. Now, following the caucuses, we may hear of a spectacular surprise come-from-behind victory for Hillary Clinton, and the reason it doesn't match the exit polls is the voters were lying to the exit pollers. And that's not an exaggeration, because that's what happened back in 2008 in New Hampshire. When going into the New Hampshire primary, Obama was leading in the polls, and everybody was saying, if Hillary loses here, she's done. And the next morning, there was a surprise, unexpected, come-from-behind victory for Hillary Rodham Clinton. And yes, it was a surprise to the exit pollers, because the exit polls had shown Obama had won overwhelmingly. And the excuse was, well, we're going to assume that, the voters were lying to the exit pollers because they didn't want to be seen as anti-woman or racist or whatever excuse they were using. And that's ridiculous. When you walk out of a polling place and there's an exit poller, you don't know who they are. You don't care what they think of you. It's ridiculous. In any other country, when the official results don't match the exit polls, there must have been election fraud. But here in the United States, the voters were lying to the exit pollsters. The reason to have exit polls is as a double check on those official results that they are, in fact, accurate. And all we get from the U.S. corporate media are ridiculous excuses why the numbers aren't lining up. But at least in terms of the current polls, Sanders has a hefty lead over Clinton in Iowa, and he's pulling ahead of her in New Hampshire. Now, Rush Limbaugh has come out on his show saying that Hillary's campaign is imploding. All the scandals are piling up. Putting Bill Clinton out there on the campaign trail was a huge strategic mistake. And a lot of people are getting ready to pop the champagne corks when Hillary is out of this race for the White House. That's not going to be enough for me, though. I want to see the Clintons in prison and all their dirty little secrets made public so that the American people come to understand that political power attracts the very sort of people who should not be allowed to have it, which is why the founding fathers of this nation went to such pains to limit the authority of the government to protect the American people. I'll be very happy when Hillary's race for the White House ends. But I'm going to go on to digging into this issue. Was she selling U.S. secrets through her private email server and using her charitable foundation to collect and launder the payments? Because the Clintons did it back in 1996. And I'm convinced she was doing it today, and I am not going to let that matter rest at all. Okay, we're coming up on the top of the hour news and commercial break. When we come on back, more issues about Hillary Clinton, the people she's taking money from, and then more about Mark Rubio and Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. And then later on in the show, more insanity about the environment, human-caused global warming. You're not going to believe the latest booga-booga about the human-caused global warming they've come up with. You will, I guarantee you will laugh. I mean, they're really out there in la-la land now. All right, so we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. I'm looking over here. Fox News is really laying it on with the bovine excrement howitzer, trying to demonize Iran. Oh, these Iranians, they treated these people like they were war prisoners. Yeah, technically they had invaded Iran's territorial waters. Frankly, compared to the U.S. treatment of prisoners at places like Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib, these Marines were treated with kid gloves. They were fed and then sent back. And the corporate media is trying to make it look like Iran is in the wrong here. No, Iran is protecting its territory. I mean, yes, the United States may have opened their borders to illegal immigrants and refugees, but that doesn't obligate Iran to open its borders to U.S. weapons of war and espionage. Have these idiots forgotten what the U.S. did to Iran in 1953, tried to do again in 2009? Have they not been paying attention to all the bomb Iran rhetoric coming out of U.S. war hawks like John McCain? Of course, the Iranians are going to be protecting their borders. Every nation should protect their borders. These were technically military vessels manned by military people crossing the line. And they're trying to make it look like Iran is bad, because the U.S. wants an excuse to not lift the sanctions. Just because Iran kept all their promises in the P5+1 is no reason why the United States has to. You just don't understand what it is to be a superpower. We're allowed to break agreements. We're allowed to go wherever we want. We bestride the earth like a giant colossus, and we'll do what we want. Seems to be the conventional wisdom over there in Washington, D.C. Now, speaking of arrogance, getting on back to the campaign here, you need to take a close look at just who Hillary Clinton is getting money from, to really get an idea of what it is she's going to be willing to do if, by some monumental feat of vote rigging, she gets into the White House. Clinton took $36,000 from Weitz and Luxembourg, the corporate partner to convicted felon and former New York State Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver. Silver is starting probably won't finish, 120-year federal prison sentence for taking kickbacks from Weitz and Luxembourg's asbestos scam. If memory serves me right, Weitz and Luxembourg was involved in that whole, I'm not going to step over that line until I do a little more research here. Now, apparently, the money from Weitz and Luxembourg was funneled to Clinton through Weitz and Luxembourg from Silver. So he's seeking a presidential pardon is what he's after. And there's a whole bunch of these things. There's an entire article full of these. And you need to look at where Hillary is getting her money, because these people are going to own her and the White House. This is why so many people are supporting Trump. He's got his own money. He's not for sale. Some years ago, we made a joke about requiring all members of the government, Congress and the President, to wear these NASCAR-type flame-retardant suits on which were sewn the patches of all their corporate sponsors. Donald Trump's suit doesn't have any patches on it, except the T, obviously. Now, Marco Rubio is out there promising that his first act as president will be to visit Israel. I will go and daven to Israel and prove who it is I work for. What's really kind of eerie, looking at his website, his slogan is a new American century, and everybody's antenna is going up saying, remember the project for the new American century? There was American militarism in the Middle East on behalf of the Jewish state, and Rubio's got that right up there on his website. And again, Rubio, like Ted Cruz, does not actually meet the natural-born requirement to be president of the United States of America. Because Rubio was born in Miami, but neither of his parents were American citizens. Now, being born in Miami makes him a U.S. citizen. It does not make him natural-born. Apparently, Rand Paul's top staffer, Elise Jordan, has quit, probably following the news that Rand Paul will not be on the main event for the coming GOP debate. Latest New York Times and CBS poll, Donald Trump is at 36%, Ted Cruz 19%, Marco Rubio at 12%. Well, it's easy for Donald Trump to have 36%. The other two people on the list aren't natural-born U.S. citizens. They're not allowed to have the job. Another poll is showing 42% of Americans say it's time to ditch the two-party system, and government is the biggest problem in their lives. Now remember, the United States was not started with a two-party system. Anybody could start a party, pull people together, say this is our platform, this is our candidate, we're going to work to get them in there. The two-party system was created to save large corporations money in bribes and donations. Going into any election, they only have to give money to two parties, two candidates. Saves them a huge amount of cash. If they get rid of the two-party system, they're going to have to be handing out money to everybody, and that's going to cut into their stockholders' sense of joy and their bonuses here. Now, talking about immigration, the story is getting more and more intense every day. Over at the Gateway Pundit, they're reporting on the fact that police in Cologne, Germany, or actually German officials, ordered the closed-circuit TV video of the sexual assaults that took place on New Year's Eve be deleted. They don't want it getting on out there and being an embarrassment to the official story. The way the video of the BBC talking bimbo announcing Building 7 had collapsed and still standing behind her got out. These things can be very embarrassing to rulers who lie to their people. They want it to go away here. Meanwhile, leaders of Eastern European states are having a moment of vindication, and they're wagging their finger and chuckling lightly at Germany, saying, "We told you so. We told you this was going to happen if you just opened up the borders like this." And the propaganda to keep this going is still going on, because over at the Financial Times, they published an article saying mass immigration is unstoppable. It's here to stay. You better get used to it. So basically, the Financial Times is saying that all of Europe is wide open for an invasion. And nothing in the NATO military could stop it? It really doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah, Europe can stop the immigration. Go down to that border, put up a wall, shoot anybody coming across it, like you would an invading army. Firearm sales in Austria are up 350% because of concerns over the increasing number of migrants and the skyrocketing crime being committed by them. Basically, it's getting hard to find a shotgun in Austria. They're going to have to make do with assault rifles, I guess. Now, up in Oregon, the situation is continuing to evolve or devolve. Hillary Clinton, who's under federal investigation herself right now, saying, throw the book at Bundy and his supporters. How dare they stand up to the government? It's our right to steal your land and pledge it as collateral for our borrowing. So forth and so on. It is a little bit of hypocrisy. Now, the occupiers at the ranch are saying that they are going through the paperwork that was stored there and finding documentation about how the Bureau of Land Management has been swindling local ranchers out of their property. And they're going to prepare a court case. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, we're talking about what's going on up at the Oregon Wildlife Refuge, where these protesters over federal encroachment onto public and private lands are trying to basically make an issue of this. Now, they're being opposed primarily by Sheriff Dave Ward, who is the figurehead leader, basically out there saying, you know, the government is always right, they can do whatever they want. You're all traitors and enemies of the state for daring to stand up when we steal your land. And apparently they had a town hall meeting, and Pete Santilli got up and asked a very serious question about the constitutional issues raised by the Bureau of Land Management's behavior in the region, and was immediately thrown out. So Sheriff Dave Ward has shown whose side he is on. Not the ranchers, not the people, not the Constitution, and it should not be surprised, because before he was the Harney County Sheriff, he worked for the Bureau of Land Management. And he was one of the witnesses against the Hammonds in this railroad trial here. All righty. Now, there's a judge in Oregon is saying that Oregon should bill the Bundys and everybody staying at that wildlife refuge for the cost of maintaining a police cordon around them. Which is kind of silly because, again, there's a constitutional issue here. But they're talking about billing them $70,000 per day, even though these people are occupying what is essentially an empty building. Down in Chicago, we're seeing a report over in the Daily Sheeple how the Chicago Police Department is desperately trying to destroy all of the records before the start of the official investigation into Homan Square. There isn't a shred of evidence that we were torturing people. It's a wild-eyed, tinfoil hat, kook, wingnut conspiracy theory. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab a phone call here. Bob in Colorado, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. How are you?
Doing good.
Hey, listen, you brought up something earlier. You were talking about the speech Obama gave and so forth. Did you hear what Wasserman Schwartz said? I think that's her name, Debbie Wasserman Schwartz or whatever.
Schultz.
That she had mentioned about how great the economy has been since his reign, and it's as good as that it's been since Depression. And I'm like, where is she coming from? I mean,
boy, they got to have some really good drugs over there at the Democratic National Committee.
I'll tell you what, the stuff she comes out with is just absolute insanity.
Oh, she still thinks Hillary Clinton would be a great presidential candidate. You know, and it may cost her job. She's under pressure to resign now because she's bankrupted the Democratic Party's coffers trying to keep Hillary propped up.
Well, they all need to be propped up because they're all fake.
That's true. That's true enough.
All right, thank you, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Okay, now then, getting on back to Chicago. In the first 10 days of this year, 120 people were shot in Chicago, which is held up as the model of gun laws for the United States. They have very strict gun control, courtesy of Mayor Rahm Emanuel. And they're always saying, that's the model. We should do what Chicago is doing. And people are getting shot and killed. That's a small price to pay to have gun bans. Obama's out there trying to say that guns in the hands of law-abiding citizens is a public health issue. Actually, those gun-free zones are a public health issue because people are dying inside of those things. Now, there's another big piece of propaganda getting ready to come on out, because Obama's definitely after the guns. Although, if you think he is, then you're a wide-eyed, tinfoil hat-wearing, wingnut, kook conspiracy theorist, and they're going to take your guns away from you because of that. Now, there's a gentleman, Elliot Feynman, of the National Gun Victims Action Council. This is a guy who makes his money screaming about gun control. And he penned an op-ed over at CNN calling for President Obama to declare a national state of emergency for the gun violence epidemic and suspend the Second Amendment by presidential authority. We don't actually have a gun violence epidemic other than in the hands of the police forces. They're out of control. Last year, the police murdered more innocent Americans than mass shooters and terrorists put together. Gun violence has actually been trending down, except in the hands of the police. Over in Duncannon, Pennsylvania, there was a police officer serving an eviction notice, got into an argument with the father, tried to shoot the father in the arm, shot and killed the man's daughter, 12 years old, standing behind him. Let's talk about education. I have been railing about Common Core and their very bizarre standards, some of the bogus things coming on out. They've literally rewritten the Bill of Rights in a way the government would like. They're teaching math skills and thinking skills in ways that slow students down. It takes more time to solve problems under Common Core. And everybody's going, what the heck was this all about? They're mentally crippling our people. Well, according to an exclusive story out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain, the textbook companies were behind the formation of Common Core, and they set it up to sell more textbooks. Because by changing the standards and changing the recommended methods of solving problems and doing things, they immediately obsoleted all the old textbooks and forced school districts and students to buy new textbooks. It's all about a huge amount of money. And I remember when I was in grade school, and they'd hand out your textbooks, and you'd have to sign the little card and turn it in. And you'd look on that card and you'd realize that, this textbook had been used for 20, 30 years. But the new business model is every year a brand new textbook because we're just going to change how things get taught. We're going to change how to solve multiplication. We're going to change how to solve subtraction so that the old textbooks don't matter anymore. It's all about making money. And they're destroying education in the process, but it makes a buck. Meanwhile, over at Penn State, political correctness has reached a new nadir because the university is out there telling students not only never say anything that might offend somebody, but to report any statements that bother you, no matter how minor, to campus officials. They're calling it microaggressions. I'm with Donald Trump. We don't have time to waste on political correctness anymore. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we are just getting word that Al Jazeera America is going to be shutting down by the end of April, supposedly because their business model is failing. Now, what that means is they are not attracting American advertisers. And the reason for that is, going to be the same reason I got kicked out of Hollywood. The people in control of advertising are simply saying, we're not going to give you any money. We only give our money to those who will lie on our behalf. And it is a shame because it is a good channel. And we get information there that we are certainly never going to see on the American corporate media. So it is a tragedy. It is a tremendous, tremendous loss. And I'm sorry to see them go. They were one of our favorite channels here on cable. Time to get a big old K-band dish and start getting our news from other nations' communication satellites. And we were able to do that when we lived in Washington State. We can't do it here. The Homeowners Association says you can't have a K-band dish. They're so picky. All the mailboxes have to be the same color. People have order. I think I know where all the escaped Nazi war criminals went. They're all presidents of homeowners associations across America. Operation Paperclip. Alrighty, getting on to the world of computers. As you know, there is a push to create the self-driving car. Google is leading the way with research. It's run into a few idiosyncrasies. Partly, there was an interesting story where the cars are being programmed to absolutely follow the traffic laws and is unable to intelligently deal with the fact that humans tend to maybe fudge the speed limit or the turns or the brakes, and the cars were getting into some troubles. They're having a higher accident rate than human-driven cars. Google insists it's going to work to improve that. The latest little embarrassment to come on out, though, is that Google has programmed their self-driving cars to pull over to the side of the road in a storm because they have not been able to figure out how to get these cars to drive in the rain. And I can take a guess what a big part of the problem is, because if you have rain or snow coming down, the optical and radar sensors aren't going to be able to actually see what's around there. They're just ranging distances. They're not going to be able to say, oh, this is rain and that's curb and that's snow and that's the car in front of me. That's going to be a big problem to solve. They're literally going to have to make car-sized artificial intelligence systems that can identify the cars around them enough to say, this guy is driving good, this guy is driving bad. I mean, in theory, if every car was self-driving, they could all get along. But driving in the real world has a lot of unknowns and uncertainties. And figuring that out requires a certain degree of real intelligence to be able to figure things out. Still, would be a fun project to be working on. Now, there's an article coming out of the Register in Great Britain. It's talking about Microsoft's Nagware for Windows 10 and how Microsoft is making it more and more clever and devious. And Microsoft is trying to find ways around people who are blocking it. One of their latest patches is continually re-enabling the registry entries to upgrade the operating system. They are pushing as hard as they can. Their latest patch is updating, resetting the registry's Allow OS Upgrade flag twice a day. One of the tools that's out there actually has a monitor function where it's running continuously to make sure that nobody is tinkering with those settings. Now, I did give Windows 10 an honest evaluation. I took this laptop that was donated for Claire's church choir. It came with Windows 7. And I said, all right, we've been whining and crying and about Windows 10. I'm going to go ahead and find out. And I let it upgrade, and it was a disaster. As usual, Microsoft moves everything around, so you got to relearn the whole thing. It was a combination of Windows 7 and Windows 8. You got the Windows 7 desktop, and when you hit the start button, you get that little tile interface. Most of those tiles are buttons to buy services, build monthly. And I started setting up the system, and then all of a sudden I got a little message about Windows 10 having to reset itself, and it went down, came back up, and my data that I had put on, Claire's music data, had vanished utterly. Not in the recycle bin. Completely gone. And I did a web search. This happened to a lot of people. Microsoft's official response, well, that's why it's important to back your data up. You should have put your data in the cloud. Okay, my issue is why this laptop ate the data in the first place. Because the rehearsal hall, where Claire is using this laptop, is in the basement at the church where the Wi-Fi will not reach. And the cloud is not available. So then I put the data back on there again. And I wanted to enable it for Skype. And because Microsoft now owns Skype, you have to set up Skype using your Microsoft login credentials, which I went ahead and did. And at that point, Microsoft reached into the laptop and changed my login username and password for me to match the Microsoft login. The login is your email address, which means if somebody steals the laptop, they've already got half the information they need to break into it. And at that point, I said, okay, it's a question. Who's in charge of this thing? Is it going to be me, or is it going to be this piece of plastic and silicon? And I'm old school. The machine is supposed to work for me, not the other way around. I had visions of that scene out of Fritz Lang's Metropolis where the guy is just there shoving the pointers around to match the lights, screaming, I have to take care of the machine. I have to take care of the machine. No, I'm not going to live like that. I refuse. Fritz Lang was sounding a warning, and we're getting there. Fortunately, and for those of you who've had the misfortune to be upgraded to Windows 10, for the first 30 days you're on Windows 10, there is an option underneath the settings, under Control Panel, Settings, Updates. There's an option to roll your system back to the previous operating system. That, amazingly enough, worked flawlessly. And I got the laptop back to Windows 7, and it's working just great. But I did give Windows 10 a fair trial here. I'm not just repeating what I saw everywhere else or saw all over the web. It's an absolute disaster. And it boggles the mind that Microsoft is pushing as hard as they can to get everybody onto this. And I know a big part of it is the new business model is that your software and your services are billed monthly now. They want to get you on monthly payment for services, computing as a metered service to you on your hardware. But it's not going to work if the operating system itself is so bad that people are going to be reverting back to what they had before. There's still a huge market out there for XP and Windows 7 machines. Nobody wants Windows 8. Nobody wants Windows 10. Microsoft has already announced they're coming out with a new, improved version next year, or this year actually, called Redstone. I doubt they'll be giving that one away for free. I don't know about you. I have gotten really fed up with this fascist arrogance of corporations who have lost track of the wisdom that the customer is always right. And now the new model is you will buy and use what we decide you should have. And I'm digging my heels in on that one. We'll be back after these few words. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we get back onto the world of computers and everything, a couple of late-breaking stories I think are important. Canadian heavy crude oil closed today at $19.81. It's broken the $20 a barrel price limit. In 2011, it was $100. It's an absolute disaster for Canadian oil companies, or oil companies everywhere. And it was all started with this harebrained idea that they were going to defeat Russia by crushing oil prices. Talk about hoisting with your own oily petard. Now then, story coming out of Press TV. Our timing with Ken O'Keefe is great because Press TV just had an interview with him, basically saying, if you think back to that bill last July in the U.S. House of Representatives that was going to restrict Obama from lifting the anti-Iran bans and sanctions, despite the P5+1 agreement, you come to understand the Israel lobby is behind all these efforts to wreck that deal. And the problem with our members of Congress going along with Israel's agenda in exchange for money, it came out that Netanyahu was bribing members of Congress as much as $1 million to try and kill the Iran deal. Which is easy for Netanyahu to do because he's getting all those millions from you, the American taxpayer. Those members of Congress going along with Israel's agenda are destroying the international credibility of the United States government. Treaties are the highest law of the land, as long as they don't violate the Constitution. It's right there in the Constitution. Treaties supersede all other laws unless the treaty violates the Constitution itself. It's very clear cut. And the United States is quickly gaining a reputation of not living up to its treaty obligations. They certainly didn't live up to the obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which both the U.S. and Iran have signed and ratified. Israel has not, pointedly. And I'm convinced these Marines and these two boats were sent into Iranian waters in the hopes of provoking some kind of a confrontation that could be used as justification to stop the U.S. from lifting sanctions now that Iran has completed all the requirements of the P5+1. And what we're seeing on Fox News supports that, because we've got all these GOP friends of Israel out there screaming that the president has to take a hard line with Iran. How dare you put your water close to our Navy? The U.S. is in the wrong here. The U.S. crossed the line, invaded Iran's territorial waters. Let us not forget that. They want you to forget it. I'm sure the corporate media people are going to be out there with their little hypnotic eyes and saying, you will forget that the U.S. is in the wrong. We're good. Iran is bad. Israel wants a war with Iran. Israel doesn't want to fight it. You know, they don't want to risk their precious little Israeli children on a war with Iran. That's what you're for. They want you to pay for it. They want your kids to be killed and crippled in the war against Iran. And they're not going to quit. They blew it today. They didn't get what they wanted. And the propaganda trying to recover from it is patently absurd. Now, getting on back to computer systems. As you know, ever since the Charlie Hebdo attack a year ago, France has been screaming freedom of speech, and passing all these laws restricting freedom of speech. The French government is now hopping on board the anti-encryption fever, as it were, as the FBI is. They are now considering a law that would outlaw strong encryption unless there is a means of access for the police and intelligence agencies to get in and always access your data, along with hackers and other criminals who will inevitably find and use those back doors. Meanwhile, real criminals and real terrorists are simply going to write their own systems of encryption that the police are not going to be able to break. We proved that with our 6 NSA challenges, none of which were solved. So what we have here is a law to make your personal data wide open to government and criminals without actually doing anything to hinder the real criminals and terrorists. It's all about keeping watch on you, because all of these governments are afraid of their people now. They're not afraid of terrorists. They're afraid of civil uprisings. That's what they're concerned about. They want to keep their phony baloney jobs with all the money and the perks and the interns and all the fun that they're having down there on Jeff Epstein's little island. They don't want to give that up. Certainly not because the will of the people is coming on it. What's the point of stealing an election if I have to give up the job when the people don't like what I'm doing? Getting on back to computers here. Apparently there is a fake WhatsApp update going around, and it's malware. It will give criminals access to all of the banking apps on your portable device. Now, I don't know about you. I don't do my banking on computers or portable devices because of this reason. And apparently this is affecting Android. And this basically steals your banking information. Now, people on Androids are getting emails purporting to be from the company that made WhatsApp, saying there's an emergency patch, click this link, and we will update you. So don't do that. Generally, software companies do not contact users by email. You have to go to the website, or there's the normal updating systems built into the smartphones. And of course, the government and the NSA either cannot or simply do not want to do anything about this. It's open season on you and your data, because that's a thing of value. And our government is desperate to find any way to grab more of your money to save themselves from their self-made economic meltdown. Remember, Kaspersky Labs identified the hacking group Equation Group as being the NSA. And so it's not beyond the realm of possibility that all of this malware that's stealing wealth from the American people is actually a covert government cash grab. No different from the Bureau of Land Management's land grab. Their top priority is grab the wealth, loot the people. It's for the good of the nation. No, it isn't. It's for the good of the bankers. Because that's what fascism is, serving the bankers. Government and corporations aligned together against the general population. That's fascism. Now, Trend Micro's antivirus has come under severe criticism because there is a major vulnerability in it that can give a web server command line access to Windows PCs accessing the web page. Now, if you know about PCs, if you have command line access, you have bypassed 90% of the securities on Windows. You can go anywhere, look at anything, copy anything off, delete files. It's been a real problem. A lot of these antivirus systems actually open up more security loopholes than they close. After Peter Norton sold Norton antivirus, it went through a really bad period where instead of making your system more secure, it made it more wide open. Google is waving their finger at Trend Micro, saying this was a major bug. Maybe it's one of the NSA-mandated backdoors. Just something to think about. And apparently the antivirus also installs a password manager that automatically launches on startup. We know these computer corporations are having to do what the federal government tells them to do to make your systems wide open to government mischief. And remember, there have been documented cases of the government stealing business secrets from law-abiding American citizens and giving them to political cronies. It happened up at the Seattle APEC. We were living in Washington State when that went down. It was in all the local newspapers, not a word on the corporate national media. We'll be right back after news and commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. I see we've got somebody who's calling in right now. We're going to get to that phone call here in a little bit. Skipping on back to my comment about how members of Congress, by going along with Israel's agenda to break the P5+1 deal, is contributing to the collapse of the United States' credibility with other nations, because the U.S. is gaining a reputation of violating treaties. And one of our members over at WhatReallyHappened.com was kind enough to point out that this really isn't anything new. They just put up 2 stories. One is called Broken Promises on Display at Native American Treaties Exhibit, and yes, it's legendary how the U.S. government would make a treaty with the indigenous people of America, and then as soon as they found something of value on their land, they go back on their word. Another story also, Broken Treaties 101. And yeah, the U.S. government's word can't be taken, even though the Constitution says treaties are the highest law of the land, as long as they don't conflict with the Constitution. Now then, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a quick phone call. DJ in Georgia, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, yeah, thanks for taking my call. The comment I wanted to make first was, the derivatives bubble.
Yeah.
Top, 5 U.S. banks have a combined derivative exposure of some $250 trillion, which is, at least 20 times the GDP of the entire country. And, a lot of people, I guess, I don't think that number is makes any sense to the average everyday person. I don't think it'll go over most people's heads, but, with only, for instance, Goldman Sachs only has maybe, 1 or 2 trillion in assets that they're holding, which is deposits and all this stuff. And meanwhile, they have 30 or 40 trillion in open, market derivatives. And it's just,
well, I mean, there are 2 ways they're going to deal with that implosion. Okay. First of all, you need to understand that the decision whether there is a default activating the derivatives is made up by a committee of representatives from the sellers of those derivatives. And they're already getting a reputation of saying, no, it's not really a default. We're going to call it a deferred resolution. They're doing that with Puerto Rico right now. All the people who bought credit default swaps on Puerto Rico's debt are screaming that they should be paid out. It's a deferred payment. You'll get your money 20, 60, 300, 400 years down the road, so we don't have to pay the derivatives. The other way is simply that they'll crank up those computers and printing presses, and they'll simply print up however many trillions it takes to get the banks off the hook, and we're all going to be walking around like they were in Zimbabwe with paper notes worth $1 quadrillion.
Exactly. It's like you were saying, there's more, more money, more debts created than the money which they can repay it with, especially when you're looking at, when a normal GDP of a country, normal economic activity and output is, what I think it's 18 trillion for the U.S. When you're able just to create another 18 million out of thin air, then yeah, there's going to be more debt. It's almost impossible to pay it off using normal.
It is impossible to pay it off because the debt always exceeds the available money supply, and anytime they create new money, it's created as another loan, whether it's to the U.S. government or to the Wall Street firms to pay off the derivatives. It's never a gift. It is absolutely another loan. They're just kicking the can down the road. In fact, they've kicked that can so much it looks like an old gum wrapper. But their thinking is, hey, this will be a problem for the next administration to solve. It'll be the next CEO to have to solve it. I've got my goodies now. I've got my retirement home in the Caymans. I'm happy. Why aren't you happy? And that really has become a terrible attitude where virtually our entire corporate and political leadership are not thinking in time spans any longer than 4, 6, or 8 years. And that's not a good way to run a nation.
Yeah, and on Saudi Arabia real quick, Saudi Arabia seems to be going off on a war footing. They're really trying to push something with Iran right now. They just beheaded that clerk, and I think they're, getting weapons shipments in from the U.S., and it seems like between, Syria and Turkey, Turkey antagonizing, Syria, and then, Saudi Arabia now going after Iran actively, I think there's going to be I think Saudi Arabia is panicking because they're running out of oil, and this price war just hurt their, they're running.
Oh, it destroyed them. They're having to sell off state-owned assets like Aramco, and they're taking that in an IPO. The situation with the beheading and Saudi Arabia trying to goad Iran. It is very obvious that what's going on here right now is the U.S. government is desperate to somehow get a major, bloody global war going that they can blame the coming economic crash on it. Because if the economy comes apart and they don't have a scapegoat for it, we, the American people, are going to point the finger of blame where it rightly deserves to go: Wall Street corruption and a complicit U.S. federal government. And that's why they're out there. They're provoking China. They're provoking Iran. They're trying to provoke Russia. And these countries aren't biting. They're not taking the bait because they all understand what's going on. The U.S. government is relying on prior history of using a world war to distract from its own self-created economic disasters. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, and here we are. And Iran didn't bite on these patrol boats going into their territory. I guarantee you by the end of the week there's going to be something else to try and say, oh, we've got to go to war against Iran.
I forgot about that. Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate your insight, and just keep harping on it. And you're the only person, independent media is getting into this stuff.
Well, thank you very much. But Claire's the one who does the harp. I do other things. I do banjo. I do 5-string banjo. All right, thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over here to Al in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I hope you and your wife are well.
Well, we're both dealing with this lingering, the malady lingers on, as it were, and I'm starting to feel better, but I'm going to have to take care of Claire after the show is over.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, it's not your fault. Unless you snuck into our house and threw germs all over us. Okay.
Well,
you work for Hillary, don't you? Admit it.
But I'm not.
You're one of Hillary's people.
Oh, God. I'm looking at the world debt clock here, sitting at, just over, approaching $59.5 trillion.
Mm-hmm.
I've been watching it for a little while, and in order for, quote unquote, the world to break even, around $77 billion has to be created every 17 minutes.
Yes.
Is that crazy?
That, of course it's crazy. It's insane. The private central bank model is by design unstable because it produces more debt. Yeah, but the purpose of this machine is to siphon off the wealth of the working people and put it in the bankers' pockets. That's why they hated the young United States, because they had a government-issued currency. That's why they had to go after Hitler for his value-based currency. That's why they went into Libya when Gaddafi had his gold dinar. They're trying to enslave the entire world to a system of permanent debt servitude, a return to feudalism and serfdom, and they're so close they can taste it, and that's why they're just panicking anytime somebody talks about how private central banking is a system of enslavement. And, they're getting reckless and arrogant and obvious.
Oh, it's Mike, it's out there. And, people like you, especially you push this constantly. I love it. The young people have to know exactly how currency is created in the Western world and pretty much the world over, anyone that has a private central bank.
Which is all but three nations right now. I think Iran is one of the last holdouts. That's why Israel is pushing for an attack on Iran. How dare they have state-issued currencies and, government control of the bankers. That's not the way the world's supposed to be. Anyway, listen, Al, I got to let you go.
Country.
Yeah, it is. I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with more phone calls. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Boy, the phone lines are just loaded up right now. I guess people got sick of hearing my voice. So we're going to go to Robert in Tennessee. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Enjoy your radio program, man.
Thank you.
Listen, would like to get your opinion on, based on the fact that one of the aides of Obama today said he's going to get real crazy with executive orders here this last year he's in office. And then an op-ed piece come out in one of the papers urging Obama to declare a civil emergency and confiscate all guns. Mm-hmm. Michael, if he was to do that, what do you foresee happening?
Unfortunately, Congress is going to do absolutely nothing. And that's partly because so many members of Congress eventually want to be the president, and they want to have the power to just write the laws of the nation from that Oval Office desk, the Resolute desk. And at some point, I'm hearing a lot of anger out there. And I think if Obama were to try and declare a national emergency without there being a just cause, he can't just stand up and say, I got it today and I've decided there's a national emergency. People aren't going to go along with it. Obama can't declare a national emergency and start grabbing the guns until he comes up with some way to convince the American people it's necessary. And, obviously all these staged false flag shootings have not accomplished that. Every time there's another mass shooting or another police shooting or another talk about banning guns, gun sales go through the roof. And so, at some point, we're starting to see Americans stand up to the government. It's unfortunately ill-advised because it's uncoordinated, like we're seeing up in Oregon. But I don't really predict the American people as a whole, 80% of whom have guns, are going to just sit there quietly and be disarmed and left totally open to having their homes invaded and their wealth stolen and their wives and daughters raped. Because that's what's going to happen. Because the police are never there when the crimes are being committed. And we have a right to defend our homes against criminals of all persuasions.
Right. I agree with you. I think a 50% margin as far as people standing up. I know here in Tennessee, Michael, we were raised different. We hunted, fished, and I know a lot of guys. And, of course, you never know what you'll do till that time comes. But there is a lot of people here in Tennessee saying they're not buying.
No, I was raised the same way that you were, and I'm hearing the same thing around here. Everybody's hit the breaking point.
Yeah, hey, Mike, thanks, man. And listen, I donate to you, and I urge everybody listening. This guy is really good. And if you get a chance to donate to him, do it.
Well, thank you very much, and we've actually had a couple of donations come in during the show here. I guess they were responding to my Powerball comment there. Robert, I'm going to let you go here, and we're going to switch over to Steve in Florida. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Yeah, donate to Mike Rivero, everybody. Yeah, Mike, I like your newer assessment of Trump's MO because, you know, I didn't really think that he was dangerously naive. I think he's just playing his cards right because he has to play both sides of the fence. And I think he's smart enough to know that, and he's smart enough to do it, too. The other ones, forget it. And the other part is about Hillary is, remember she was in Jordan, and she thought, you know, she was going to have a lot of applause from, I think she was in Jordan. But anyway, she wound up getting shoes thrown at her. And I swear somebody must have hit her in the head, hit her good, because she left and was immediately in the hospital.
Well, no, that wasn't from the shoe. She actually suffered a fall and a concussion. And there's concern, and there is concern that she did in fact suffer permanent damage.
Okay, yeah, I just thought it'd be poetic justice for, you know, somebody just hit her in the head with a shoe.
Well, you know, in some parts of the world that is considered a very deadly insult, but I'm sure the Secret Service threw themselves in front of the incoming Nike.
Mike, you're the greatest.
Thank you very much. We're going to let you go, and we're going to grab Anthony in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just wanted to comment. I know a couple of days ago you guys were talking about how Trump was, you know, indirectly kind of slipping some truth movements regarding 9/11. One of the things that I actually was thinking about is that Donald Trump was a real estate mogul. He must have known, he definitely knows Larry Silverstein very well. He must have known that those buildings were filled with asbestos. And when Larry Silverstein bought those buildings, you know, there was no real business reasoning for him buying those buildings. Now, I think we have to know he bought those buildings so that the Mossad could go in, wire the buildings, and, you know, et cetera.
Well, in hindsight, that appears to have been exactly what happened. And when Silverstein got the World Trade Center, Donald Trump and a lot of other people were just scratching their heads saying, why on earth would you make such a bad business decision? Because the EPA mandated renovation to get rid of the asbestos would have bankrupted Larry Silverstein. And in hindsight, you know, yes, we understand that he got the buildings demolished in this false flag terror attack, and he got the taxpayers to pay for the cleanup. He got his insurance payout on his terrorism policy on the building, and he made out like a bandit.
Exactly. And to me, the biggest red flag with Silverstein, you know, a lot of people point to that or the, you know, the pullet comments, but it's his connection to Netanyahu. And the thing is, you know, the Clean Break document, all those documents were written specifically for Netanyahu, and he happens to be close friends, saying he speaks to Netanyahu on a weekly basis. So to me, that was definitely the biggest red flag with that. Mm-hmm. So, but the thing that surprised me with that is that Donald Trump has got to know that. That meanwhile, you know, I saw a commercial on YouTube where he's praising Netanyahu in the last election, telling Israelis that they need to vote for Netanyahu. So I don't know if it's because of his business dealings or whatever it is with it, but it's just...
Oh, he's already said that. Trump has already come on out and said, I have to be careful with Israel because he's doing a lot of business with Israeli companies and he doesn't want to lose that. But he's being upfront and honest, saying, yeah, I'm treading easy on Israel for financial reasons. That's more honesty than you're going to get from any other candidate.
No, fair enough. It's just unfortunate with the Iran issue. He just, you know, he seems, you know, it's kind of ironic. He was against the war in Iraq, but he seems pretty belligerent on Iran, saying, you know, the deal was a terrible deal. I actually think that's the one decent thing that Obama did was the Iran deal out of his presidency.
Yeah, well, again, this is one of the reasons why, I mean, even if Trump is getting better political advice and he's trying to be careful as he charts his course, there's still some statements he makes that tells me he doesn't really know everything that's been going on behind the scenes in Washington, D.C. He's an outsider, just like Jimmy Carter was. And Jimmy Carter came into office very naive and... Well, we got to let you go for the commercial. I'm sorry. We got to take a commercial break. So we'll be right back with more phone calls. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We got a couple more calls we're going to get to. But before we do, there's a breaking story I need to get to you. South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley was chosen to give the GOP response to Obama's State of the Union speech, but she seemed to spend a huge amount of her time attacking Donald Trump. And a lot of people are scratching their head and saying, wasn't this supposed to be about Obama and the State of the Union? What were you doing? Nikki Haley has now acknowledged that, yes, her speech was intended to attack Donald Trump, the leading GOP candidate, and it was approved of in advance by the Republican leadership. They're still trying to give him the Ron Paul treatment. They are scared out of their minds at the possibility of a president who will not do what they're told to do. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Keith in Montana, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, just two little things here, and then I'll hang up there, okay? But I just wanted your comment on it. One is on the post on the broken treaties 101 that you have on your website right now.
Yes.
And I wanted to comment on that for the fact here about how the United States frequently broke all these treaties, especially the natives and stuff. And you can summarize that with whether it's the Navajo and the uranium mines and what they did to confiscate lands, whether it's the Sioux Indians, the Black Hills Gold, everything. However, what I want to throw at you there's an awesome video which has to do with like this multiculturalism and this immigration and IE/war refugees. That's called Indian Giver on YouTube, and it documents. It documents how this young Indian boy, I believe it's from the Michigan area there, how he was assimilated into the U.S. school system like that, and of course he wore his beads and he had his long hair, and but by the time they got done, they cut everything, hair was down short and like that, assimilated into the so-called U.S. system of things, and the correlation on that is when they were talking to one of the tribal elders, the one elder says, when they first approached us, the Indians, with land ownership, we never knew what that meant because we owned it all.
Yes.
And I never thought of it that way. So anyway,
that's the way the indigenous Hawaiians thought about it. It was just all one big lump, and they owned it collectively. And then the missionaries showed up and came up with the idea of actually dividing, putting lines down, and land ownership. And somehow the Christian missionaries wound up owning most of it, which has shaped Hawaii's economy and politics ever since. And if you really think about it, in a very real way, the Constitution is the treaty between the U.S. government and the American people, and they've certainly been violating that one.
Yeah, and to summarize that, you well know that I live on an Indian reservation here in Montana.
Yes.
And I today can look at Montana, our reservations, and we do have nice reservations as far as the tribal members and everything like that. However, the reservations themselves look no different than what Gaza does.
Yes.
They're just a bunch of piles of trailers and stuff like that. And since Americans don't understand what was done to the American Indians, they don't see what is being done to the Palestinians. It's the same premise.
Well, there's another film that you all ought to look at, and it's called Incident at Oglala. It was a documentary about the Leonard Peltier case from Sundance. And it's a very good one, and if you want to see what life is like on a Native American reservation, that's a good place to start there. And by the way, I'm sure when the Europeans first started showing up on the shores of North America, the Indians were saying, we can open our borders to them. I mean, they got a strange religion, they won't speak our language, but what can it hurt letting them into our country? Really, what can it hurt?
Sounds good. Anyway, best you and Claire, okay, Mike?
All right, thank you very much here. We're going to take one more phone call today, and then we're going to close the phone lines. Frank in Arizona, aloha, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I think I have a great idea for the gun grabbers.
Yes.
Why not, if you own a gun, bring it to your police station or city hall, and they'll issue you a card that's proof that you have a gun. So if you want to rob a convenience store, you just come in, show your card, take what you want, swipe your card, and then it's randomized, whatever the odds are of getting caught.
Yes.
And if you happen to get caught, you get a letter in the mail, and you report to the police station, and that's it.
Yeah, that's about as effective as what they're doing now, I think. My understanding is that if you were to take a gun and go into a part of town where nobody knows you and rob a convenience store, there is less than a 1 in 30 chance that the police are even going to talk to you about what's going on, even with all the cameras and everything. Keep your head down, recomb your hair, shave off your beard and mustache, whatever, less than 1 in 33. And the odds against actually going to prison are even worse than that. This is a very crime-friendly country because we have a crime-friendly government. It's only the law-abiding Americans who are constantly being spied on and pounded on and kept in our place. The criminals have got free reign of the place, including Washington, D.C.
I know. It's just a silly thought for a silly world.
Mm-hmm. Okay?
Yeah, that's about it. Okay. Love yourself.
All right. Thank you very much, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to close the phone lines here because I got a few things I want to get to before the end of the program here. Getting on back to computers, we're seeing in computing over in Great Britain that worldwide PC shipments are down 8.3% in the fourth quarter of 2015. Now, part of that is because of the push away from desktop home computing to selling you devices that are merely terminals into computer systems owned by large corporations and rented to you on a monthly basis. They're literally taking the model of personal computing back to the 1970s, where everything was on giant mainframes and what you had in your home was merely a terminal. I remember my first terminal when I worked for Robert Abel & Associates. I had an old VT52 and an acoustically coupled modem that did 300 baud connection, and I could log in and check on my renders and go out on the just beginning internet, Usenet, all the rest of that. And it was real fun. We'd take the phone out of the acoustic coupling, we'd jangle our keys over the microphone just to see what would show up on the VT52. But they're trying to go back to that, where all you have is a tablet or a smart device, and all of your data and all your software are on these giant mainframes that are being basically rented to you on a monthly basis. They're really pushing hard to go to that model. And I am opposed to that model, first of all, because there have already been a couple of disasters where the cloud has lost people's data. Second, if it's on the cloud, it's wide open to being peeked at. Makes spying on you that much easier. And forget that nonsense about it. You don't have to worry if you've got nothing to hide. We all have something to hide. We have our Aunt Mary's top secret chocolate chip cookie recipe. We have our business plan for the new company we want to start. We have the ideas for a product that we are developing. We have a reason to keep that private because the government has already demonstrated a willingness to steal such information from law-abiding American citizens and give it to political cronies. Those polls are correct. The biggest danger we all face is this out-of-control central government. Now, the other reason for PC sales to decline is because nobody wants Windows 10. That's a big reason they're trying to go back and force Windows 7 and 8 users onto it. Nobody's buying computers if they come with Windows 10. It's just nonsense. By the way, apparently Intel has been forced to acknowledge their Skylake chip has a hardware problem. They're claiming they can fix it in the microcode. Maybe. But apparently during very intense numerical calculations, the chip can freeze. And so now we know what happened to all those old Pentium floating point engineers from back in the 1990s. They went to work for Skylark. Boy, oh boy. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program on this Wednesday here. It's time to talk about human-caused global warming. As you know, the start of winter was delayed because of El Niño, which is caused by undersea volcanoes. It's got nothing to do with human activity. A lot of volcanoes and thermal vents down there. And every once in a while, they crank up, and that's where the El Niño comes from. But although the winter has been delayed in its start, it does look like it's going to be every bit the severe winter predicted by the Old Farmer's Almanac, various other experts. Needless to say, Obama and the rest of the carbon Nazis are still trying to convince you that you have to pay a tax on carbon. Then there'll be oxygen, then there'll be nitrogen, then there'll be a sunlight tax and a cloud tax and a grass tax and whatever else. They don't seem to realize there's nothing left to tax out here, and that's why the economy is grinding to a halt. So they're looking at ever more spectacular headlines to keep the global warming idea alive in the minds of the people. This is not a joke, and it is not satire. This is from the Daily Mail over in Great Britain, Global warming could cause humans to develop webbed feet, cat's eyes, and gills. As the oceans rise, we will become aquatic, and there really will be mermaids and mermen. They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel for global warming booga booga. Had somebody write in and ask if they develop cat's eyes, would that get rid of their allergy to cats? And I'd say, yeah, but you're going to get a real allergy to dogs. Now they're out there trying to say that, well, there's a little bit of good news. There's been so much human-caused global warming, we've probably delayed the start of the next ice age for at least another 100,000 years. This is written by somebody who does not understand the cyclic nature of the ice ages and the clear signs we're heading into one. But they're just out there, just whatever they can say to keep people thinking about, oh yes, human-caused global warming is real. We've got to do something about it. Here, take my money. Tell me I have to live in a little 260 square foot apartment that I pay $3,000 a month for. They're having heavy snow in Moscow. Snow warnings for England and Scotland. The temperatures are expected to drop to minus 15 degrees centigrade. Boston is expecting an Arctic blast ahead of an incoming snowstorm this weekend. You probably heard on the news broadcast they're talking about lake effect snow. That's one of the phrases they've come up with to try and say, well, the lake effect overrides the human-caused global warming. The human-caused global warming is still there. All the snow and ice is from lake effect, like there hasn't always been a lake effect. And if the world is warmer, the lake effect snow is going to melt real quick, and it didn't last year. Apparently, in upstate New York, there was a car got stuck in the ice and literally encased in a block of ice 2 days ago, a little over 2 days ago. They just today managed to dig it out. Now, the Campbell's Soup Company has reversed its stance on GMO labeling. They used to be supporting these industry groups that were opposed to GMO labeling. They've had a rethink. They have cut all their funding for these front groups opposed to GMO labeling, and Campbell's is now saying they support mandatory nationwide GMO labeling. They are going to be labeling all of their soup products. So we can now expect that all of a sudden we're going to start hearing all these stories about how E. coli or something else is showing up in Campbell's soup cans all across America. Because remember what happened to Chipotle's when they announced they were going GMO? All of a sudden, E. coli, and the CDC says it's a strain normally not found in food, but it started showing up in Chipotle's restaurants. Because nobody stands up to Monsanto on the matter of GMOs. By the way, a little bit of trivia you probably are not aware of. Remember that Blackwater group? They changed their name to XZ Services, and more recently Academy, and they were caught up in all this torture in Iraq, and they do a lot of work for the U.S. government that the U.S. government wants to have deniability for. We didn't torture all those people. They were private contractors. We don't know anything about it. Well, Academy was recently sold to Monsanto. According to this article in Political Blind Spot, yes, Monsanto has bought the Blackwater Mercenary Group. We have the prime seller of GMO now has its own clandestine security service. So, means, motive, and opportunity. I think it's pretty obvious who's been messing around with Chipotle and who will be messing around with Campbell's Soup now. Any day, going to say, oh, Campbell's Soup, it's got botulism, it's got this, it's got that. Stay away from Campbell's Soup. You want your daily dose of Monsanto GMO saturated. That's the only safe thing for you to eat. Just like the vaccines are safe. And the chemicals are safe. The real world is natural world. It's all dirty and it's full of germs and things you don't want to put in your mouth. You want the product from the laboratory. It's clean and white and shiny. It may not be any good for you. Now then, turns out the company that is behind this horrible methane eruption at the Porter Ranch gas well knew this pipe was leaking 24 years ago. And they didn't do anything to fix it until it finally just let loose totally. Now, UC Davis has sent a scientist, Stephen Conley, and he's got this, he studies these things in the atmosphere. He's got a special aircraft fitted out to detect airborne pollution. And he was flying it just downwind of this natural gas storage facility. He says he's never seen a methane leak like this. And he's got to be really careful, because methane in the atmosphere, if it hits that right balance between the atmospheric oxygen, it can detonate. And I think it's only a matter of time before something, aircraft engine, firearm, lightning strike, is going to set that off. And then people really will see how bad that leak is. Red Adair wouldn't be able to deal with that, even if he was still alive. Now, story coming out of Natural News. Corporate media, after all these decades, is finally admitting that putting fluoride in drinking water is absolutely useless. It has no benefit to public health. We saw the story came out a week ago where researchers are showing that American teeth from people living with fluoridated water are actually weaker, more fragile than teeth from people who are drinking just plain tap water. They went back and looked at the original research from the 1950s that said putting fluoride in water was going to be good. They found it was shoddy. They just had a toxic waste they needed to get rid of. Oh, well, make the American people drink it. That'll dilute it down to harmless levels. And, of course, fluoride is a minor tranquilizer. Keep you all happy and calm when the government steals your money and your land, sends your children off to be killed and crippled in wars of conquest and greed. It's just like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and the soma that everybody had to take to keep them relaxed and tranquil and pacified, living in the dictatorship. We're there. We're there. Apparently, GM and that whole situation over the ignition switch, they had a solution presented to them to fix it. Would have cost 90 cents per unit, less than $1. And rejected it because they didn't want to spend that extra $1 to make the car safe. It led to at least 125 deaths. And finally, a little bit of bad news from outer space. The Philae lander that soft landed on a comet, craft of the European Space Agency, fell into a shadowed area and went silent some months ago. They were hoping as the comet got closer to the sun, it would wake back up, and they're saying at this point, no, they don't think that's going to happen. So that's kind of sad. Anyway, that's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to look after the Lady Claire. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. According to the Gallup poll, Americans are very distrustful of the government. They're starting to ask important questions. Make a point of being there to give them the answers they need. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.